Hello and welcome back to another part of the iniBuilds ground school. Now this will be the first ground school session in quite a while. The last video was the update video for about version 1.1 and we're currently on version 1.11. So we're just going to quickly cover at the start of this the differences between version 1.1 and 1.11. There's not many, so it shouldn't take very long. And then we're going to move on to the main lesson plan. So as I said last time, we're going to go over final few items, and then we're going to do a pushback. We're going to get the engine started. We're going to talk about engine start, and we're going to talk about taxiing and taxi behavior in the INI A300. And if we get any further, we're going to continue to go and see how far we get in the time frame that we're given. Because as you well know, these videos can go on for literally hours. I think we've been waiting here for a few months to do our flight now. Seasons have passed. Airlines have rotated around the planet entirely with their aircraft. We've been here a while, let's put it that way, but eventually we are going to make it to London Gatwick Airport. Trust me, we will. But first of all, let's talk about a few housekeeping items. Alright, so here we are again, just a little bit closer up in the captain's seat. I don't want to start the video off on a negative note, but this might seem a bit negative, but I want to talk about it. There was a bit of negative feedback from the last video, the 1.11 update, and some of it comes from the fact that I definitely could have worded better what we're trying to get across, but also I'd like to get across the ethos of the company, and it's a shame that I even have to say this really, but let's just lay it out. Some people have said statements such as, I'm not going to fly the A300 until they return to realism, not visuals. What do they mean by that, and where's this all come from? Well, at the end of the last 1.1 update, I said that we'd optimized the auto land to be smoother because simmers like that. Now, what I meant by that is you could quite literally take the real code from an aircraft, put it into X-Plane, and the aircraft will not fly properly because X-Plane isn't the real world. It's a very good assimilation of what the real world gives in terms of physics, but it's not the real world. The tires don't have the same amount of friction. Everything is just slightly not the same. And we are dealing with constraints of simulation in general. This is definitely not a go at the X-Plane platform because it's fantastic. But I think people need to really get their head around how this works in simulation. Is when I say we've changed the auto thrust to be more realistic in the sim, I mean it's now more realistic. Not we made it less realistic, it is more realistic compared to the real aircraft's behavior, but the code that we had originally was closer to what the aircraft would do, but we're in a different environment. And that goes the same for the auto land. The auto land is better, more realistic, more refined, better at coping with winds, and will give you a smoother touchdown. The older system would give you a very nice touchdown sometimes, and would sometimes give you a very, very hard touchdown in other situations that were slightly more challenging for the system. A system that the real Autoland would have been able to cope with. Hence why we redid the system. So there's going to be a big banner flashing now saying, the systems are more realistic. The systems are more realistic. You don't have to say to us, please can you return, please can you give us an option. I'm going to be quite blunt here. No. There's not going to be, do you want the Autoland system to be worse? Please tick the box here. It's not going to happen. So, a little bit negative start to the video, but I kind of ashamed that I have to say it anyway. We are obviously always going to try and make the aircraft more realistic. Now, definitely could have worded it better, but please use the system, compare the old and the new, have a look for yourself. Don't just latch on to what I said in the video. We always strive for realism. We will never deviate away from that unless it's for convenience, like center FMS, for the takeoff performance calculation where it goes via the pseudo ACARs. That's just a convenience thing, right? It's a thing that in the real world you type the numbers in together. We've just made it easier to transfer. They're the only times we're going to take liberties with what the real aircraft systems would function, is when in reality it's much easier to do. You know, like calling ground services, all this sort of stuff. You don't have to do that in reality. Also in reality, you don't have to worry about inaccurate weather injection and slightly violent wind corrections screwing up your auto land. or your auto thrust. So we have to adjust the systems to match what we're presented in X-Plane. So I hope that's a bit clearer now. I hope the people are not ready there typing the keyboard, smoke's pouring out of it saying, but you said, it's like, I know what I said. But I hope this now puts it more into perspective of what I meant to say. And you can feel free to fly the aircraft and on the understanding that it's more realistic. And also the new auto thrust, as per the real one, if it's very, very windy, it cannot cope. It can't cope. That's the realistic. It will overdo it and you will pull it back and you'll have to disconnect it. So it's not like we've made it as good as the 320 auto thrust. It's still, you need to take control at some points, but it's more realistic compared to the actual aircraft. I hope that's clear now. Right. Next, let's move back to the EFB and talk about a few things that people are having problems with there as well. Alright, so we're looking at the EFB now. Again, this is not a negative, you should know how to use it. I just want to make it super clear of some of the reports and feedback that we've been having of your EFB is broken, your EFB doesn't work. Okay, let's look at why that might be and how you can make it work better for you. Let's put it that way. So a fair few people are saying my cursor, so cursor here, is stuck and I can't get it to move. Well, the first thing you might notice there is if my mouse is outside of the EFB window, like this, the cursor is stuck where it was last, but as soon as you move it back in, then it will appear back on the EFB. Now obviously, this is one of those things that in reality, you just touch the screen, but we have to say when your mouse is inside the frame, then it moves on the EFB. When it's outside the frame, it doesn't move. So that's how the cursor can get stuck as such. Another one is when people are typing in weights. So let's you join me on the takeoff performance page, because this is where a lot of the issues come in with data entry. So two things. Mainly it's to do with inserting data into the boxes that people have a problem with, but we do find reports of people saying, I'm not going to fly the aircraft because the EFB is so broken. It's not broken. It's a tiny bit counterintuitive in some areas, but that is to do with the limitations of us having to have an EFB in the simulator that's integrated in this way. So it works, trust me. Just follow these steps if you're having problems with it, and I'm going to show you how to replicate them and much easier ways around this whole thing. So first of all, we're not going to do it, but I'm going to talk about it. You don't have to type anything in here at all. If you're having problems, just don't type stuff in. Type it into the init alpha page and then fill out the arrival and departure, as I said. If I just clicked FMC data, the takeoff weight's going to fill itself, and click ADIS request. Done. Then you can click compute. You don't have to type anything into the EFB at all. You can just type it straight into the FMS, which works in a purely conventional manner because it has a keyboard. Easy. That's the easiest way to do it. That's the way I recommend everyone does it, because it's easiest, quickest, least hassle. But let's see if you want to type it in and where it goes wrong. So as soon as I click the box, you see it goes green. Green means you're now interacting with this window. If I just type the numbers now, so 1, 2, 3, it works. Okay, so the problem with it is, if I move my cursor, see, outside of the EFB window, and I click, you have to click as well, now the code is going, okay, this person isn't interested in entering data inside the EFB. Now this is a limitation where we have to basically see when you are and are not typing, because we can't just understand that. We have to have an input from you to do that. Now if I press a button, say number 1, can you see now how it's toggling the view? It's not actually typing the numbers in that I want. Okay, so how do I solve this? It's pretty easy. See the cursor? Move it back into the window for the EFB. Click, so now it knows it's back in here. 1, 2, 3. That's it, simple as that. And if I then click enter, it goes away, we get the cursor back, and we know what we're doing. I want to delete it. 1, 1, 1, 1, enter. Well, no, let's not do that, that's stupid. Enter, done, click. I'm going to click outside the window. Oh look, I can't type. I'm actually now activating flight controls and whatnot in the background. Oh, click back in the window. 1, 2, 3. I wouldn't say it's that simple, because I can understand, and I apologize if anyone has ever just sat here for hours thinking, how on earth do I do this? This is so infuriating, but that's how you do it. But like I say, the easiest way to do it, because I'm going to do it now, is just go FMC data, ADIS request, done, literally done, and that's it. Now I can click compute. There's no need to type anything in at all. There, bang, done. And same thing with the UI design. Talk about this a little bit. Obviously this is it's a bit of a negative way to start the video, but I feel like we need to get across to people why we're making the decisions we're making. So I can see people saying your UI sucks, please remake it. Well, fine, it's all taken on board, and as you can see we execute those differences from users' requests for having the buttons not be the indicators, but this is actually Airbus's design for their takeoff performance calculator. It's based on LPCNG. You can Google that right now if you want, and you can see that ultimately we're following realism, and that's the way it goes sometimes. We've made it more user-friendly by making the buttons way bigger than they are in reality, way bigger, so you can actually click them in the sim. But there is obviously one of those double-sided coins. Some people say I want the sim to be easy to use, and some people say I want it to be as realistic as possible. But we are following what Airbus do and what Airbus design. So ultimately it comes back to it's a decision to be made, and that's the one we did. We followed the real thing. And from the feedback from the other video, people are saying I wouldn't want you to simplify, I want it as realistic as possible. Well, here it is. it's kind of like, which one do you want? But anyway, that's where this comes from. The grey, the white, the colour scheme, everything is from Airbus. That's how they design, and this layout as well is the same layout. That's why it's quite actually intuitive, because it's based on what you would really use on the line, because we're an on-the-line product. Yeah, and that's it really. We added in the other stuff to make it easy to use, FMC data, ADIS request, and yeah, I would say go back and watch the videos. I hope this is not too much of a negative start, but let's move on to the main part of the video. One final thing before we move on to the rest of it. It's a change between 1.04 and 1.11, and it's a bit of a cruel one. I think we should have made it clearer of what the change was, but again, it's following the real system. If the IRSs are not in the attitude mode, so they're not aligned, or you don't have a visual indication of the PFD. So at the moment we can see ATT and it's in red. Well, it's obviously not working. If you see the blue and the brown, the attitude globe as they call it officially, or blue side up, brown side down all the time, otherwise you're having a bad day, then you can't engage the pitch trim. So if I try and engage the pitch trim now, see they engage and then they immediately trip off, because basically they're not latching and then they latch off. So that's the real behavior. So if I now align the IRS, and for this demo I'm using instant alignment, so let's do that now. I'm going to pop this out to make it easier. Init, alpha, align IRS, boom, there we go, immediately aligned. We have the attitude globes on both sides, and then we're going to engage, and see, it's latched on. So there you go, that's how you get it. That's the small difference, and it's something that you're going to have to do from now on in your flow. So quickly, what are the differences between 1.1 and 1.11? Well, what we had was a conflict with a few other third-party plugins that meant that some people, after they pushed back, didn't have nose wheel steering. This was because of the third-party plugins setting one of the lines of code inside X-Plane to a 0 when it shouldn't be touching it at all, but by the by, and it just caused a conflict. So we resolved that. That was the main reason for the update. A few other very small things, but if you did experience that issue with 1.1, 1.11 will definitely solve that, and we recommend you update it. So now, I know I've said this 3 or 4 times, now let's get to the main part of the video. Alright, so first of all we're going to talk about setting up the FCU, and I do apologize because it has been so long that I cannot remember if we've fully gone over this in the other training videos. But even if we have, this is a great time to review, because I'm sure that some people are going to go, you know what, I just don't really care about 6 hours of content, I just want to know how do I start the engines and how do I depart. Right, so basically we've programmed the FMS, we're going from East Midlands to London Gatwick Airport via what we put in, and we have all the cost index, same altitude, blah 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 blah, and everything is set as it would be if you've just typed that in. We've turned all the lights off and we're ready to go. So what do you need to do on the flight control unit? Again, remember, I am going to get my Airbus Boeing 320 earlier, later, Airbus model, family, all this sort of stuff, it's going to be mixed up, right? So I think we all know what I mean when I say FCU. The big thing at the top that makes the autopilot go up and down, that thing, right? That's what we're talking about. So we've got the speed set as V2. You have to set that manually. We've got the altitude that we're going to climb to, no air traffic control and no stop altitude today. We've been told we could go all the way up to our cruise, so I've put that in. Normally you'd put your first stop altitude because remember the A300 has no VNAV in climb. That's what the real aircraft has. It doesn't have it, it would just blow straight through the constraints. I don't know why. I think it's because the absolutely monstrous rate of climb, it just wouldn't level off properly in P alt. I'm pretty sure that's why it doesn't have it. In PDES it can cope with it a bit better because it descends quickly, but it's more manageable than the climb. My guess, I don't know. Someone in Toulouse knows. Please let us know. I would love for someone from Toulouse to just leave a comment, but like, actually it's like this, because they are the real geniuses who built this aircraft. Making a simulated version of it is difficult. Building the real thing in the 80s, incredible. Right, sidetracked already. And then we've got vertical speed and the heading. So the heading will be aligned to the heading that you basically are at when you align. It happens to be that the stand we're on today, it kind of lines up with departure. You can see that we're on runway 27, the stand, its heading is 268, pretty close. Again, I told you before that this isn't an SOP thing, this is how the plane works technically. Airline to Sim have made some fantastic SOP videos. Put that into the search bar at the top and they'll show you how to set the aircraft up from an SOP perspective, and off you go, and I highly recommend those. So what we can do is two different things that we should do. So once we've got V2 set, and we need to tell the aircraft what modes we want to use for takeoff. Now we can arm these on the ground and on the stand. It's not like, and I'm going to say this and people are preemptively moving their fingers towards the keyboard in rage, it's not like a 7.3. As I understand it, you set the FCU up, but you have to put some modes like VNAV and LNAV on in the air. I hope that's correct, I think. Right. Anyway, if it's not, you get my point. But in the A300, you can arm them on the ground, and you should arm them on the ground. If you don't arm them on the ground, you're going to have a bad time. Because once the aircraft gets airborne, it's going to basically go, I don't know what mode you want, have some nonsense flight director guidance, which is what often happens. And it also creates problems with thrust reduction. So, how can we do these takeoffs, and what sort of takeoffs can we do? Two distinct types. We can use profile and nav for departure, which is the easiest way to do it and is the way I recommend doing it if you're new to the aircraft. And in fact, I think a fair few crews really use it. A fair few don't, because they just don't like profile and they see it as just doesn't work, which is interesting, but yeah, it just doesn't work very well on the real aircraft in some of the fitments. Or what you can do is you can put in the altitude you want and the heading that you want, and then once you're airborne you have to initiate a few other things, but we're going to talk about those there down the line. Let's stick with the simple one for now. So we want to arm profile and we want to arm nav. Now can you see here we've now got p.climb and nav in blue, so they're armed. They're the armed modes. They're the modes that are ready to go. They're not active. Vertical speed and heading are still active, which is, in my opinion, a bit weird, but whatever. It's a strange aeroplane. So it's saying that after takeoff, I'm going to automatically do these things. P, climb, and nav. Yeah, kind of. Makes sense, sort of, right? Good. So nav kicks in, like the A300, like the more modern Airbus family aircraft. I haven't said that for a while. At 30 feet. So at 30 feet it'll automatically start tracking nav, which is pretty low, to be honest. Actually, that's very low in fact. And P climb will initiate itself at the thrust reduction altitude. Now this is dependent on what we typed into the FMS. Now remember earlier when we were typing it in and how you change it in the EFB, I'm not going to go over that, but a standard figure of say 1,000 feet is generally the accepted, what people use. So at 1,000 feet above the aerodrome level, the aircraft is going to go, right, I'm now at the altitude in the FMS, and I'm ready to accelerate, and profile will engage itself automatically. Now, why is this a good thing? Now, the nice thing with profile engaging itself automatically, profile speed takes over, so the speed comes from the FMS. So if we have a speed restriction, it's going to adhere to it. Again, it won't adhere to the alt restriction, it'll just blow straight through it, but the speed restrictions, it will. And the thrust will automatically reduce itself if we used toga, auto, or flex for takeoff, which are the only settings that you should. You know, MCT and climb and cruise, they're not appropriate takeoff settings. So basically, this TRP here will automatically cycle itself to the correct value. You don't have to worry about it, which is nice that it does that. Thank you, Mr. Airbus. That's a good design, nice, simple philosophy, and it's why I recommend doing this, because you can get caught out quite easily. So let's talk about a few other things that can happen. So if I start turning this off and turning this off, and now I've got a few things on here that I'm not happy with, like alt blue, and I don't really like what I'm seeing, what you can do, so we're going to turn both flight directors on, is you can turn the flight directors off. So they're linked from the settings menu, and you can see it blanks this column at the top, the FMA, the flight mode annunciators. I put them back on, you get it back, and now you can build it back up again. So if you end up with nonsense on here that you don't like, just turn them off, turn them on, and then redo it. That's actually what they do in the real aircraft. It's called cycling the flight directors. It's a good practice if it's doing stuff you don't like. You think, right, off, on, let's start again, rather than let itself get into a mess. Because it can get into a mess and not be recoverable on the ground, I'm on about as well. That's the real behavior of the aircraft. So let's talk about that other type of takeoff. So the other type of takeoff is we're going to take off, we're going to get airborne, we're going to get reasonably good flight director guidance, and then what we're going to do is we're going to press manually when we want to accelerate. So remember, I told you it's going to climb at that V2 speed, blah 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 blah, which is our 162. It's going to try and aim for that because that's the speed that's in the window. That's what it's trying to do. And then what we can use is we can use the preset function. So I'm pretty sure we talked about this before, so I'm not going to go over it again, but very, very quickly go over it. So if I put a preset of, and like I said, SOPs, different airlines did different things. Some of them put the first speed constraint in. Some of them put green dot plus 20. Whatever takes your fancy, you put it in here. But in this case, 250 would be our first speed constraint because we don't have any speed constraints on the departure. So we could do it like this. Now what have I done? I've got a bit of a mess going on, so I actually don't want profile. I could use nav because I want it to do that. So what's going to happen is I'll take off, and now remember I told you at 1,000 feet above the airfield, which is 1,000 feet on the altimeter, it will automatically accelerate. It won't do that now. It's not going to automatically accelerate because profile isn't armed. So it's not linking it back to the FMS. It's going, I don't know what to do, how to accelerate, what is life? It doesn't understand. It's dumb. It's going to maintain that V2 speed, the 162. You can see it's still there, right? So we have to manually intervene. And then at 1,000 feet, we'd go bang. We'd hit level change or vertical speed or whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever mode you want to use. But level change is definitely the most appropriate in this case. And then the aircraft's going to go yoink, and it will swap to the preset speed that's in the window because there's been a mode change. Go back and look at the videos for that if that's confusing. And you will accelerate to 250 knots, retract the flaps, blah, blah, blah. Now, there's a threat, a big threat here. This little nasty TRP, it's not nasty, it's lovely, but whatever. It's not going to automatically change. If you took off in toga, it's going to go, oh, okay, I don't know what to do. Are we in the climb? I don't really know what phase we're in, blah, blah, blah. And it will just stick at toga. So you automatically need to press climb like this. You need to do it manually because otherwise it doesn't know. If you stick at toga, it is going to climb like mad. And it's dangerous because the engines, after I believe the limit is 5 minutes of toga, you shouldn't operate them at more than toga thrust or at toga thrust for more than 5 minutes, and you're going to end up overspeeding the aircraft even in the climb because of the 6,000 foot per minute max climb rate for the aircraft. it's going to be a bad time. So, what do I recommend? We're in a tutorial here. I highly recommend don't use preset, use profile, use nav, leave the speed in here. You can set preset if you want, but just keep it simple. Just put the V2 speed in there, and if you want, you can put the first constraint if you want to. It's fine. So I'm going to kill you. It's go and check out Airline to Sims video for more SMP orientated, but I hope that kind of illustrates the two types of takeoff you can do. Profile takeoff, or we can do it manually, where we press level change and we have a preset speed and it will automatically accelerate to that speed. Remember, you don't have to use nav, you could use heading, and then obviously the heading is up to you after takeoff and you have to do it yourself. And there's one final mode. This is taking a bit longer than I thought, but anyway, it's fine. I hope it's a bit interesting. If you tune the localizer for the runway that you're going to depart on, it will show you runway on the FMAs here, and what will happen is you'll get a little bar, a little deviation bar left and right here, and what will happen is that's tracking the localizer as you're going down the runway. You get it in the 320 as well, or more modern Airbus family aircraft, but they tune it automatically, and here you have to physically dial it in and all this sort of stuff to get it. It's kind of a weird mode. It's really not that useful unless you're in very low visibility. So unless you're in low vis, don't bother. In the 320 it just does it itself, so why not use it because it's there. But if you want to use it, use it. It's modeled, it does work. But yeah, basically that's it for setting up the SCU. So we've got peak climb, nav, final altitude in there. You can use preset if you want for the first restriction or green dot plus 20. And if you're going to do it manually, press level change at the thrust acceleration, and thrust reduction altitude, you press the button automatic. You have to do it manually if you're doing it like that. In profile, it will do it itself. Bit confusing, but anyway, let's continue on. So if I flick the APU master switch on, you can see that the batteries come inline green to connect themselves to the DC essential bus to help with the start. Now what I can do is I can press the APU start button here. Now if I just turn all of the fuel pumps off like this, like that. Now if I press this button now, let me just turn this off and back on again. Do you see how there's a low pressure light that's now illuminated? So what's happening is the fuel pump on the APU, it has its own fuel pump, is kicking on, and it's going to pressurize the fuel lines to ready for the start, because we didn't have the inner tank pumps already on. So if I turn on the inner tank pumps and do that again and turn it on, see there's no low pressure light because it's getting its pressure like this. You can follow the little handy dandy lines. There we go, to the APU. But let's think of this in a more complex way. Turn it off, turn these off. Now with these on, is it going to make a difference? Well, no, we should still get the low pressure light, and we do, because yes, the inner tank pumps are on for the right side, but the crossfeed's closed, so it doesn't make a difference. Okay, so now let's put them on. So we put the pumps on here. Let's put it on. No low pressure light. I'm just going to turn them all on again. I told you, obviously, SOP wise, don't do this, but it's fine for what we're doing. And to start the APU, you just click start. Now, I'm going to actually pause the sim, something I don't often do, because I want to talk about what's going to happen and where you can see the indications of this. Automatically, the APU page will be drawn up on the eCam SD page on the bottom right hand side, so you can monitor the APU start, which is nice. You can see it on there. It's a great place to look at it. But there's another place to look for it as well, which we're going to look at now, and we'll talk about why you would want to look at it. So let's do that. So you can see here, APU page is brought up and we can see the APU starting. So let's have a look at the other indication. So if we look at the back wall here on the maintenance panel, we can actually see the EGT, the N1, everything rising for the APU as well, because this is a secondary backup indication. So you can see it if you're starting the aircraft from cold and dark and you have no ground power, you can actually monitor the APU start from here. And these figures are more accurate than the ones that are shown on the eCam because they come direct from the sensor. Alright, we're back on the overhead. Paused again. I know, unusual, but I want to talk about what the lights mean. So excel means it's not a really good APU. It means it's not, wow, you're really excelling at being an APU. No, it means accelerate. So basically it's saying the APU is spinning up. a bit of a weird way of saying it, but sure, why not? It's saying that it's accelerating. It's not available yet. It's still starting. So basically, if you see Excel, it means I am starting up. So let's unpause. So you can see it's going Excel. It's still showing Excel. And eventually what will happen is the light will change to show that it's available. And once it's shown that it's avail there, which is the same as the more later Airbus family aircraft, but which happens on the same button, then it's ready to be used. Yeah, basically that's it. You see accelerate, you press the on button, it starts to accelerate, it accelerates, it finishes the start cycle. Once the start cycle is finished, it will say avail, it's available for use, you're good to go. Quite cool thing. Bleed temperature depends on bleed demand, or sorry, exhaust gas temperature depends on bleed demand, so we can actually go up and down if we toggle the APU bleed, blah blah blah. Cool, check that out if you want to. But yeah, let's quickly move on. This is engine start, not APU start tutorial. I think we're way over time already, but that's why there's multiple parts available on YouTube. So let's keep going. So let's quickly talk about what we're going to do next. So next we're going to turn on the APU bleed, and a few things are going to happen. We've talked about this in the bleed overview and all this sort of stuff, so I'm going to keep it brief. Turn on the APU bleed, you will hear the sound actually get quieter and then louder, which is a real weird quirk of the A300, that turning on the bleed kind of makes it quieter, louder, then quieter again. I don't know why. It's a real recording from the real aircraft, and multiple crews have confirmed this is what happens, but it's a funny one. So listen out. So quieter, louder a bit, but then overall kind of quieter with the APU bleed on. I think maybe it drops the avionics cooling down because it's getting direct air straight into the avionics bay, so it doesn't have to run the fans as much. Pretty sure that's the reason why. So what we saw was this go inline green because it's feeding it. The crossfeed automatically opens to feed pack 1 and pack 2. We get the inline green and we get the pressure showing here from the APU. So let's turn it off. So we get a fault light, the crossfeed closes, and then we lose the pressure there. If we turn it on, inline green, this pack comes on, enunciator comes on, crossfeed opens, this comes on. So the packs are automatically on, the crossfeed's automatically open, no need to reconfigure the panel at all. It does it all automatically, which is super nice. So how do we start the engines on this aircraft? It's not that complicated, and it's actually I think it's quite nice. Like it's complex, more complex than more modern Airbus family aircraft, but not that complex. It's easier to start than a 7.3, in my opinion. Please get your hate comments below. Just kidding. So let's talk about this. We talked about it before. Again, brief overview. I think the amount of times I've said brief overview, I could have just explained the system again, but never mind. This is the I'm going to just use the name that I know from the modern Airbus family, the engine mode selector. I don't think it's called that. Maybe it's called the ignition switch. I don't actually know what it's called for the A300, but we'll stick with engine mode selector. Makes sense, and if you've flown a 320, you'll understand. So we have cont, off, crank, A, B. Now you probably heard and saw some things happen there. So if it's on ignition off, don't type a comment saying what does it do, because it's just ignition is off. It's what it does. It's pretty simple. It's its standard default position. It's in off. Cont relight is continuous relight, which means that the starter is clicking away. It's designed for wind shear, bad weather, and I believe the Pratt & Whitneys use it for approach. It's the same sort of thing. Other aircraft use cont relight in pretty much exactly the same way. There's nothing crazy about it for the A300. So apply that in the same way and follow the SOPs. So crank, what does that do? Well, it's more of an engineering thing. So what it does is, well, yes and no. We'll quantify that now. Basically, it spins the engine over without using the igniters. So in crank, you can't start the engine. It will show you all the same indications for start. It will spin the engines up, you'll put fuel in, nothing will happen, because it's basically just pouring fuel into the engine with nothing to ignite the fuel. So nothing happens, basically. So if you have it in crank and the engine won't start, it shouldn't start. And that's hence why they've even added this handy dandy little start thing, because remember, pilots are stupid. We all are. They want to make it clear that this is the thing for starting, crank is not, and that's why they did that. A and B, very similar to a 7.3 or Boeing or whatever, any other type of aircraft that you have an A and a B. You have an A and a B on modern Airbus family aircraft, but they automatically cycle between them. But on this, you need to choose odd, even, don't know, whatever type of days. I don't know, make up a reason to use either or igniter, but there's your reason. The cool thing that the A300 does is it automatically reconfigures the bleed system ready for start. What do I mean by that? So in other aircraft, you need to turn off the packs and turn off the bleed and open the crossfeed and turn the bleed off and blah 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 blah. Airbus were already in that state of, that's too much work, screw that. So if you move it, we're going to move it to B. Did you see what happened over here? And can you hear the sound in the background? So what happened automatically was the pack 1 and pack 2 went off automatically. And you can see that their inline bar has gone, but you can still see there's bleed pressure shown here, because basically it's automatically turned the packs off, ready for start. So let's see that again. If I go to like this, see them come back on, and you can hear them come on. I'm going to put it to A now to prove it's the same thing. They go off, we have enough bleed pressure ready, and that's what happens. Okay, now before we move on to how to start the engines, you need to configure your X-plane in a certain way. So let's talk